Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Bill in Mid-Missouri, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Guy in Ohio, Yehudit, South Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Renee in Indiana, Shandora in the Bronx. Belle in Texas, Lorraine in Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Michelle in Jupiter, Gail in Kansas City, Frank in San Pedro, Alan in New York City, Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Joseph loves my shirt. Thank you. Thank you very much. This kind of always used to be my look years ago, and then it changed, but it's a good summer look, right? Thank you. I am so thankful for this period. It's like you would think, oh, the movie came out, things get a little calmer. You know, there was so much to do preparing for it. No, au contraire. There's so much to do now. It's an incredibly challenging marketplace. With all these summer superhero movies taking up thousands and thousands of screens, holding screens, very, very difficult. So we're going to have a smaller footprint this week. But, I mean, I can't share it yet until the deal is signed, sealed, delivered. But we're working on something quite special that's going to enable a lot of people to see the movie in a theater. That's all I'm going to say. Very excited. But suddenly, a ton of unexpected work. But man, you're up, you're down. You're up, you're down. It's quite a process bringing a movie into the marketplace. We've heard from so many people how meaningful the movie is to them. That means the world to us. Haters emerge, And it's funny, the haters never say, they hate Jews and that's why they hate the movie. But then when you look, and obviously there's people who just don't care for the movie. I'm not saying everybody has to love the movie that I directed. I'm not nearly that egotistical. I mean, all directors have some ego, but I'm not at that level. It's just when you see certain kinds of criticism that really make no sense, and a kind of vituperativeness about it that just is so out of place. Like, people don't really speak that way about movies. They're obviously triggered by something. Something is off narrative for them, whether it's the presence of Jews or other ideological matters associated with the movie. Perhaps it's Jews defending themselves with firearms. Who knows? But that I really try not to get to me. But there's just highs and lows. You hear good news, you hear bad news. And one thing that I can say, and I think that in part, it is our learning together every day that really assists in this and praying 3 times a day with a minyan, with my congregation. But even at the lowest lows, and there have been many challenging, truly challenging moments in this journey, which is so high stakes for us. Even when things, seem to go really badly, I can say honestly that I turn to God and say, I accept. I have a plan. You have a plan. Your plan is better. I don't always understand your plan, but I trust you. I love God and I trust God. So even when, it doesn't seem to be going my way, I know God has a plan. I just accept that. Now, emotionally, that's not always easy. I'm not saying that just because I am totally subscribed to this, intellectually, it's my philosophy. I'm always trying to cultivate this in my heart. That doesn't mean it's easy, and sometimes emotions just arise in you and it's like, but then at that time I remind myself that I love God and trust God, and it helps a lot. So just reporting to you, from the front lines when we're really in the thick of it. Now, thank God, I get to learn with you. So let's do it. We are in Tractate Avoda Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5 here in chapter 2. We got a good start on page 38 yesterday, so we are about 3/4 of the way down, page 38a. Now, the Gemara addresses the matter we began to discuss yesterday, that Rabbi Bar Chana says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to this idolater who singed the head of an animal, it is permitted to eat part of it, even from the tip of the ear, which is fully cooked. And Ravina said, therefore, with regard to this idolater who threw a moist peg in the oven in order to dry it out and harden it, and a Jew had already inserted a gourd, which is a vegetable, in the oven from the outset, the gourd is permitted, even though it was in effect cooked by the idolater. Now, what we're talking about is that the sages decreed that Jews can't eat food cooked by idolaters. Okay? Now, that basically means you can't eat food cooked by non-Jews, right? So in that period, all the non-Jews were idolaters. Sometimes this is translated as idolaters. Sometimes this is translated as goyim, right? Which goyim is not a negative word. That just means non-Jew, or really means nations, but it implies non-Jew. But there's a decree that we can't eat food cooked by non-Jews. Now, in the modern world, Jews can't eat food that's not kosher, period. So there's many other laws that come into play here, whether food is kosher or not, the whole cooking process, the hechsher, the foods themselves. Some of these laws had not yet been developed there. But why are we having a basic rabbinic ordinance that Jews can't eat food cooked by non-Jews? I keep saying idolaters because generally we're talking about idolatry here in Avoda Zara. And as we saw, so many of the decrees were very much because of the fear of idolatry, right? That the wine was used for idolatry, that the animal might have been dedicated to idolatry, and that if we come into too much contact with idolaters, we'll be drawn after their practices and come to commit idolatry, the terrible, terrible sin of idolatry. So that's a primary, theme in this whole tractate and motivation for so many of these decrees. As we've seen, there's 3 other matters that are also involved. Number 1 is intermarriage. The sages decreed many things just so that we won't come to marry non-Jews, which would in turn draw us after idolatry. A simple matter of don't eat the food of non-Jews because they eat non-kosher items, and you may come to eat non-kosher food, even if you're not eating their food, but you're eating around them, right? So there's this danger that you'll come to eat non-kosher food. And as we saw in this period in history, when the sages are passing all these ordinances, the idolaters around them weren't just committing the sin of idolatry, weren't just committing the sin of prohibited sexual practices, weren't just trying to entice Jews to go into prohibited sexual practice and idolatry, but they were downright violent and hateful toward the Jews. And a lot of this was just to protect Jews' safety, literal, the safety of their lives, because coming, too close to the idolaters might end up in bloodshed, that they would just kill the Jew if they had that opportunity, because in their society they could all too often and easily get away with it. So these are all these factors are part and parcel of these laws as we read them, right? The ban on the cooked food of the idolaters because it leads to intermarriage, to eating non-kosher food, to idolatry itself, and to bloodshed. So here what they're talking about is on the specific of you can't eat food cooked by the Gentiles, right? A Jew cannot eat food that's cooked by the Gentiles. So then they start to test that. Well, what if the Gentile was firing up his oven, in order to harden a piece of wood for construction, and the Jew put a vegetable in there so that it would be cooked by that same fire? The Gentile started the fire in the oven. Is this now effectively cooked by the Gentile or not, is the question being asked here. The Gemara continues this discussion with regard to the cooking of Gentiles by examining the law of meat cooked by a combination of a Gentile and a Jew. So Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says if a Jew placed meat upon flaming coals and a Gentile came and turned the meat over, the meat is permitted. Because here, the Jew participated in the cooking, and therefore it's not meat cooked by a Gentile. It's interesting, and even today, in kosher restaurants, there are non-Jews who work there, but it's the Jew supervising to make sure that what ends up on the plate is kosher. And this is a similar idea. And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of this case? If we say that it is a case where if the Gentile had not turned over the meat, it would have cooked anyway, it is obvious that the meat is permitted as the Gentile's actions did not actually alter the food. So the Gemara suggests, rather, is it not a case where if the Gentile had not turned it over, it would not have cooked? But if so, why is it permitted? In such a case, the meat is certainly considered to be the cooking of Gentiles, and it ought to be prohibited. And the Gemara explains, no. It is necessary to teach this law with regard to a case where, if the Gentile had not turned over the meat, it would have cooked in 2 hours. And now that he did turn it over, it will cook in only 1 hour. So lest you say that hastening the cooking process is a significant matter, and therefore the food whose preparation is expedited by a Gentile is prohibited, Ravina teaches us otherwise. This is considered Jewish supervision and is permitted for the Jew. The Gemara asks, but doesn't Rabbi Asi say that Rabbi Yochanan says any item that has been cooked like the food of Ben Dorosai, i.e. partially cooked so that it is just about edible? This Ben Dorosai, this comes up in a lot of different places in the Talmud, a very colorful way to describe food that is barely cooked. It's barely cooked, but it's cooked enough that it's edible, right? For somebody who likes to eat their steak rare, that would be like the cooking of Ben Dorosai. Who was this Ben Dorosai? He was a bandit. He was a bandit who was always on the run from the law, so he didn't have time to cook his food properly. As soon as it was singed enough to eat, he would eat it. And so colorfully speaking, we're talking, when we say the cooking of Ben Dorosai, we mean meat that is just cooked enough so that it's barely edible, but okay, we can define it as cooked. It's the minimum measure of cooked. 99 out of 100 people would not eat that meat. It's not cooked enough. But we can say it satisfies the definition of cooked, even though most people wouldn't eat it. Right, so doesn't Rabbi Asi say that Rabbi Yochanan says any item that was cooked like the food of Ben Dorosai is not subject to the prohibition of the cooking of the Gentiles? Meaning if a Jew cooked it just enough so that it's now cooked food, then if the Gentile finished it, so to speak, even if the Gentile supervised much more of the time that meat spent on the grill than the Jew did, still the Gentile is just finishing the meat. It was the Jew who essentially cooked it. So it would not be subject to the prohibition of the cooking of Gentiles. And consequently, it is not cooked like the food of Ben Dorosai. Consequently, if it is not cooked like the food of Ben Dorosai, then it is subject to the prohibition of the cooking of the Gentiles. Meaning if the Jew, maybe just put a little bit of seasoning on it, threw it on the grill for just a few seconds, like it is not, even Ben Dorosai wouldn't eat it. And then a Gentile cooks it, so then that is food cooked by a Gentile, and Jews would not be permitted to eat it. So the Gemara answers there, Rabbi Asi was referring to a case where the Jew had placed the meat that was not yet cooked like the food of Ben Dorosai in a basket, where it would not have cooked at all, and the Gentile took it and he placed it in the oven. So Rabbi Asi was teaching that in such a case, when the current cooking process has yet to begin, the meat is prohibited if it had not already been cooked, like the food of Ben Dorosai. By contrast, in the case addressed by Rabbi Yehuda, the meat was already cooking, and the Gentiles' actions hastened the process, but did not initiate it. In other words, the issue of cooked food, like the food of Ben Dorosai, is relevant only if the Gentile takes a dish that is not being cooked at present. Now, the Gemara adds, this is also taught in a Baraisa. A Jew may place meat on hot coals and let a Gentile come and turn it over as necessary until the Jew comes back from the synagogue or from the study hall, and the Jew need not be concerned for the prohibition of eating cooking of Gentiles because this is supervised by the Jew. He initiated it. And similarly, a Jewish woman may set a pot upon the stove and then let a Gentile woman come and stir it until she comes back from the bathhouse or from the synagogue, and she need not be concerned. We're on page 38b. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If a Gentile placed meat on a fire and a Jew turned it over, what is the law? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, the law can be derived by a kal v'chomer inference. If the meat is permitted when it is finished cooking by the hand of a Gentile, then when it is finished cooking by the hand of a Jew, all the more so is it not clear that it should be permitted. But that kal v'chomer, we could challenge it, right? Didn't we say, well, the reason that's permitted is because the Jew initiated the cooking. But if now the Gentile initiates the cooking, why are we going to make a kal v'chomer about who finished it? It's not a clear analogy. Along these lines, it was also stated that Rabbi bar bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, and some say Rav Acha bar bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, whether the Gentile placed the meat on the fire and the Jew turned it over, or whether the Jew placed the meat on the fire and the Gentile turned it over, the meat is permitted and it is not prohibited unless its cooking from beginning to end was performed by the hand of a Gentile. So interesting, who initiates doesn't matter as long as a Jew has a significant part in this cooking process, then it's going to be permitted to a Jew because we consider it under Jewish supervision. Ravina says, the law is that this bread baked in an oven that a Gentile lit and a Jew subsequently baked, or alternatively, if a Jew lit the oven and a Gentile baked it, or alternatively, even if a Gentile lit the oven and a Gentile baked the bread and a Jew came and stoked the coals to heat the fire, it is permitted as the act of the Jew speeds up the baking process. So it's very interesting. Now, what we saw already is if the food is entirely cooked by the Gentiles, if the bread is made by Gentiles, that is prohibited for the Jews. Why? Because it will lead to idolatry, to intermarriage, possibly, to eating non-kosher food, to bloodshed, etc. All these concerns of the sages. But if the Jew is participating in the cooking, then it's okay. Now, I'm not commenting on where the halacha ends up. I'm just sort of free associating a little bit here. What they don't want is Jews going out into the world, right, and dining and dancing and intermarrying with Gentiles, right, because of all these concerns. But it seems that they're definitely not prohibiting the idea that a Gentile could come into our home and break bread with us, right? So there's something quite beautiful about that because they don't have the restrictions we do, right? They don't have the kosher restrictions that are obligating them the way we do. All Gentiles, all people in the world are obligated in the Noahide commandments, but that doesn't include all the laws of kosher diet, or kosher dining. We are obligated in those laws. So if we have control over the environment, there is a concern with intermingling, but interesting, we're not concerned that we're going to end up intermarrying with them if they come to our house and have a meal with us. Maybe that really what it does is promotes the ways of peace and learning together. I just find that interesting. Let's keep going. So along these lines, no, I read that. Okay, so we've been talking about cooking. Now we're going to get into sort of the liminal areas of what is considered cooking and what is not. So the Gemara continues. With regard to fish that was salted by a Gentile. Salted, interesting, this is way ahead of sushi in the world. Maybe like herring. But the concept here is raw fish, just right off the fish, basically not edible, at least in the sage's eyes. But you put salt on it, and it is edible, right? Even though you haven't cooked it yet. So the question is, do we say that salting is tantamount to cooking because it takes something out of the realm of the inedible and makes it edible? Or do we say, well, it's just salting, it's not cooking? Let's see. With regard to fish salted by a Gentile, Chizkiya deems it permitted, and Rabbi Yochanan deems it prohibited. As for an egg roasted by a Gentile, Bar Kapara deems it permitted because he never got at the substance that's inside the shell. It's like it's cooked, but in terms of kashrut at least, right, he only cooked the outside. The edible part remains sealed inside the shell, presumably. That's why there's even an opinion that would permit an egg, but let's keep reading. So with regard to, as for an egg roasted by a Gentile, Bar Kapara deems it permitted. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, prohibited. When Rav Dimi came from the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, to the Jewish community in Babylonia, in Bavel, he said, with regard to both salted fish and roasted eggs, Chizkiah and Bar Kapara deemed them permitted, even if they were prepared by a Gentile, but Rabbi Yochanan deems them prohibited. So now the Gemara relates a relevant incident. Rabbi Chia of Parva arrived at the home of the exilarch. Who's the exilarch? Right, the Reish Galusa. This is the head of the Jewish community in Bavel, which is part of the Persian Empire in this period, meaning not part of the Roman Empire. Right? And in the Persian Empire, there's the head of the Jewish community. He's known as the Reish Galusa, the head of the diaspora, of the exile. Right? And so he's called the exilarch in English. And he's the head of the Jewish community, right? So he's like a king of the Jews in Persia. It's a political office, but usually these were also great sages in that family. So Rabbi Chia Parva arrived at the home of the exilarch, whose attendants said to him, with regard to an egg roasted by a Gentile, what is the law? And Rabbi Chia said to them, Chizkiah and Bar Kapara deem it permitted, and Rabbi Yochanan deems it prohibited. And the statement of one sage has no standing in a place where it is contradicted by two. Meaning, if there's two great sages that say it's permitted and one great sage who says prohibited, we follow the majority so that the egg and the egg roasted and the fish salted by the Gentile would be permitted for eating by the Jew, is what he reported to them as the view from Israel now being delivered to Bavel. Rav Zevid, I guess who was present, said to them, do not listen to him, as this is what Abaye said. The law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Right? So now you see, because they didn't have instantaneous communication like we do, there's disagreement on what exactly is the law. Right? And so Rav Zevid had a tradition from his teacher, from Abaye, that says, no, we follow Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore the egg roasted or the fish salted by the Gentile prohibited. Rav Zevid, coming from the land of Israel, where it's understood to be a little bit more authoritative a tradition, right, closer to the source of the sages who, that tradition obviously began in Israel, says, no, we follow the majority. Here's two great sages versus Rabbi Yochanan, so it would be permitted. Rav Zevid says, don't listen to him because of the view of Abaye. Due to the stringency that Rav Zevid sought to impose, the attendants gave Rav Zevid a cup of spiced vinegar to drink, and he died as a result. This is a very troubling story, and it ends right there. I don't know what to make of that story. I don't think that they gave him poisoned vinegar, possibly he was expecting to drink cider or something, and instead he received spiced vinegar. It was shocking to him. Maybe he coughed. Maybe it was a terrible accident. Is the teaching here, don't impose an unnecessary stringency? We learned that in other places. I'm not sure, but that's the story as it was reported. Now, the Gemara continues to discuss the legal status of various foods with regard to the prohibition against eating the cooking of Gentiles. The sages taught in a baraisa, caper buds, these are known as kafrisin, and leeks, kaflotot, and matalia, and hot water, and roasted grains that belong to Gentiles and were cooked by them are permitted. An egg roasted by a Gentile is prohibited. With regard to oil, Rebbe and his court were counted, i.e. voted on the matter, and they permitted it. It is taught in a baraisa that matalia is the same as the black-eyed pea, known as pashalia, which is also called shiata. What is shiata? Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, it is 40 years since this item emerged from Egypt and it was imported here. And Rabbi Bar Chana himself said, it is 60 years since this item emerged from Egypt and was imported here. And the Gemara notes that they do not disagree, as one sage issued his statement in his year and the other sage issued his statement in his year. Right? It was either 40 or 60 years from the emergence of this new plant from Egypt when the relevant sage ruled. The Gemara describes the preparation of shiata. Sounds like the black-eyed pea. They take parsley seeds and flax root and fenugreek root and soak them together in lukewarm water, and they leave them until they sprout. And then they take new earthenware pots and fill them with water and soak red clay, known as gargishta, in them, and then stick the seeds and the roots in the clay. And after that, they go to the bathhouse, and by the time they come out, the plants have blossomed. Whoa. And they eat from them. This is some kind of incredibly fast blossoming plant that you eat that fresh. And as they eat them, they cool down from the heat of the bathhouse, from the hair of their head until the toenails of their feet. And Rav Ashi says, Rabbi Hanina said to me, these are mere words. This is false. It is impossible for plants to blossom so quickly in a few hours while you're at the bathhouse. Something you planted is now blossomed and you could eat it. And some say this was performed by means of magic words that caused the plants to grow faster. We don't have more information than that. The sages taught in a baraisa the law with regard to date husks, known as kuspan, that belong to Gentiles and that were heated in hot water, depends on the size of the pot. Depends on the size of the pot in which they were prepared. If they were cooked in a large pot, they are prohibited, as prohibited foods are often cooked in large pots. It's not that this food itself presents a problem that would render it prohibited, but it's cooked in a pot where the Gentiles cook other foods that would certainly be prohibited, and that will impart some residue of those prohibited foods on this particular food. If they were cooked in a small pot, they are permitted because non-kosher foods, which are usually large, are not generally cooked in these pots, and it is therefore reasonable to assume that the pot has not absorbed a prohibited substance. Again, this is not the law as it stands today. Kosher food has to be cooked in kosher pots that do not belong to non-Jews. The Gemara asks, and what is a small pot? And Rabbi Yanai says it is any pot that is so small that a swallow cannot enter into it. The Gemara challenges this. But even if non-kosher foods were not generally cooked in pots of this size, perhaps they sliced the food into smaller pieces and inserted them into the small pot. Since large non-kosher foods can be cooked in small pots once they have been sliced, the concern should apply to these small pots as well. And the Gemara accepts this point and amends Rabbi Yanai's definition. Rather, a small pot is any pot that is so small that a swallow's head cannot enter into it. Such small pots would not be used to cook even sliced non-kosher foods. I mean, a swallow is like, that's a really small pot. It's hard to imagine anything could be cooked in that. Let's keep going. The Gemara cites difficulty. But in any case, isn't it taught in a baraisa that food cooked in both a large pot and a small pot is permitted? And this directly contradicts the baraisa cited here, which permits only food cooked in a small pot. So the Gemara answers, it is not difficult. This first baraisa cited above is written in accordance with the one who says a prohibited substance that imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture is prohibited. Whereas the baraisa mentioned here is in accordance with the one who says a prohibited substance that imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture is permitted. Right? In other words, if the prohibited substance improves the flavor, then for sure this is prohibited food, right? Because it includes some trace of non-kosher food in it, and that non-kosher food improved the taste of the food. For sure, this is prohibited for a Jew to eat. Where they argue is if some residue of non-kosher food detracted from, mixed in with the kosher food and made it taste worse. According to one view, it doesn't matter. It's residue of non-kosher food. It affects the taste. That means it's significant enough to affect the taste, renders the food prohibited. And the other view is, listen, it's just a residue. It's not helping, so you'd never do this on purpose. It actually makes the food taste worse. But we're not going to impose, perhaps on poor people who ended up in this situation, that now the food is spoiled and they can't eat any of it. So we don't want to increase stringencies unnecessarily. According to that view, that side of the argument. Rav Sheshes said this oil that was cooked by an Aramean is prohibited. Rav Safra rejected this ruling and said, with regard to what need we be concerned? If it is due to the concern that it might have been mixed with wine used for idolatrous libations, this cannot be correct, as wine ruins oil, and therefore the Gentiles would not mix them together. If it is due to the prohibition against eating the cooking of Gentiles, this also cannot be true because oil is eaten as it is, i.e. raw. You don't need to cook oil in order to consume it. And if it is due to the oil being cooked in the vessels of Gentiles that require purging on account of the prohibited taste that they have absorbed, meaning the taste of prohibited substances that were cooked in them, and now the forbidden flavor from the vessel is in the food, this concern is also not valid, as the absorbed substance is one that imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture, and in this case the mixture would be permitted, according to the one who permits it, if the absorbed flavor is only to the detriment. The sages raised a dilemma before Rabbi Asi with regard to these boiled dates of an Aramean. What is the law? And the Gemara interjects, do not raise the dilemma with regard to sweet dates, as they are certainly permitted, since they can be eaten raw. Similarly, do not raise the dilemma with regard to bitter dates, as they are certainly prohibited, because they are only rendered edible through cooking. So if you're eating a bitter date that was rendered edible by a Gentile for you, it means he cooked it, and you can't eat it. Rather, let the dilemma be raised with regard to dates whose flavor is moderate, neither sweet nor bitter. What is the law? And Rabbi Asi said to them, what is your dilemma? The law is clear, as my teacher prohibited such dates. And the Gemara asks, and who was the teacher of Rabbi Asi? And the answer is Levi. With regard to shetita'a, which is a sweet porridge made from roasted grains and honey, Rav deemed it permitted even when it was prepared by a Gentile, whereas Shmuel's father and Levi deemed it prohibited. And the Gemara elaborates with regard to shetita'a. Shetita'a. Let me read this. Shetita'a. I want to see this word written out in Hebrew. Yeah, so we would probably pronounce it in Ashkenaz as shesisa'a. 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 Okay. Shesisasa. Shesisa'a. Shesisa'a. Like a seesaw. Shesisa'a. Okay. With regard to shesisa'a, made of wheat or barley, everyone agrees that it is permitted. And similarly, with regard to shesisa'a prepared from lentils, to which vinegar is added, everyone agrees that it is prohibited, on account of the vinegar of the Gentiles, which would be made from the wine of the Gentiles, which were concerned it was used in idolatry. When they disagree, it is with regard to lentils made only with water. One sage, Levi, holds that we decree prohibition with regard to this porridge made without vinegar, because people might come to eat the porridge that is made with the vinegar, which comes from the wine, which was used by possibly for idolatry of the Gentiles. And the other sage, Rav, holds that we do not decree for this reason. We're too attenuated from the possibility of the Jew coming to eat something prohibited. The Gemara notes, and some say that with regard to lentils made only with water, everyone agrees that the shesisa is prohibited on account of lentils made with vinegar. Where they disagree, it is with regard to shesisa made of wheat and barley. One sage, Levi, holds that we decree a prohibition with regard to this porridge prepared with wheat and barley due to that porridge made with lentils. And the other sage, Rav, holds that we do not decree for this reason. Again, if it's made of wheat and barley, it's not made with vinegar. So there's no concern about this particular issue that it might be made with vinegar that came from wine that might have been used for idolatrous libations. But the more stringent view is we're going to prohibit even this wheat and barley porridge of the Gentiles, which for sure does not contain vinegar in it, because Jews who get accustomed to eating that might then come to eat the lentil porridge, which might have that vinegar in it. Apropos the mention of shesisa, the Gemara relates that Rav said Barzillai the Gileadite sent two kinds of shesisa to David, King David, as it is written, and Barzillai the Gileadite of Rogalim brought beds and basins and earthenware vessels and wheat and barley and meal and parched grain and beans and lentils and parched pulse. 2 Samuel 17:28. Barzillai brought two kinds of parched foods, grain and pulse. When the Gemara concludes, and now shesisa is taken out in baskets upon baskets to the markets of Nehardea, and there was no one who was concerned about that stringent ruling of Shmuel's father and Levi. So we see a little bit of an evolution in the halacha during that period. The Mishnah teaches, and boiled and pickled vegetables of the Gentiles, whose usual manner of preparation involves adding wine and vinegar to them. What do we think? Prohibited. These may not be consumed, but one may derive benefit from them. This is interesting because the wine of idolaters is prohibited both for consumption and for benefit. You cannot drink it, but you cannot buy and sell it because there's a high possibility, likely possibility, that the Gentiles of this period who are all idolaters use that wine as an idolatrous libation. But here, one step removed, where we're saying there's a concern that there's this vinegar in a food. Okay, because of that, the Jew can't consume it, but he can purchase and sell it. But one may derive benefit from them. And Chizkiah says they taught that this prohibition applies solely to consumption, only where their usual manner of preparation involves adding wine and vinegar, though there is no information about how these particular vegetables were prepared. Right? If it's common that it could be done with vinegar or wine, or it could be done without, but it's common enough that it is done that way, we have to be concerned. Whether or not we have direct information that this particular vegetable was done that way. But where it is known, okay, so he's saying he permits, no, that's prohibition. But where it is known for certain that these vegetables were prepared with wine or vinegar, it is prohibited even to derive benefit from them. Okay, so if we don't know whether the wine or vinegar was used, you can't eat it, but you can buy and sell it. If you know for sure that there's the idolaters' wine or vinegar in these foods, then not only is it prohibited for consumption, it's also prohibited for benefit. And the Gemara asks, and in what way is this case different from fish stew, which the sages permitted one to derive benefit from? I can't eat it, but you could buy and sell it. And the Gemara answers there, with regard to the fish stew, wine is added merely to remove the stench of the fish and does not actually contribute any taste to it. Whereas here, with regard to pickled vegetables, it is added to sweeten the taste. The Gemara cites a dissenting opinion, and Rabbi Yochanan says, even where it is known that wine or vinegar was added to the vegetables, it is also permitted to derive benefit from them. Earlier, Rabbi Yochanan was the stringent one. Now, in this debate, he's the lenient one. And the Gemara asks, and in what way is this case different from fish stew? According to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who prohibited deriving benefit from the fish stew. Why does Rabbi Meir permit one to derive benefit from vegetables pickled in Gentiles' wine, but prohibit deriving benefit from fish stew that contains wine or vinegar? And now we're at the top of page 39a. The Gemara explains there the substance of the wine is a recognizable component of the fish stew. Here, its substance is not a recognizable component of the pickled vegetables. The Mishnah teaches, and minced tarit fish, and brine that does not have a kilbit fish floating in it, and chilak are all prohibited. And the Gemara asks, what is chilak? So Rav Nachman bar Abba says that Rav says this is sultanit, which is a type of small fish that is generally caught before its scales have developed. Which fish are kosher for Jews to eat? Fish with fins and scales. Here we have a fish that when it's first born, it's a guppy, right? Before it becomes an adult fish, it has fins, but the scales have not yet developed. But it's a species that will have scales. So they're asking, before the scales develop, is that fish kosher? According to this, yes. And for what reason? Oh, wait a minute. This is sultanit, a type of small fish that is generally caught before its scales have developed. And I'm sorry, and for what reason is it prohibited? It is because its size causes it to be intermingled with other fish. Not that it lacks scales. It's going to have scales. It's a species that grows scales. The problem isn't that the scales haven't come in yet. The problem is when you're catching so many of these small fish, the net also gathers in non-kosher animals. There's somebody help me out. Plankton, right? What whales eat, that's plant matter, right? But I think krill is, very small little sea animals, that would definitely not be kosher. They're kind of very tiny crustacean, and that would get caught up in these nets, so that's a problem. It is because its size causes it to be intermingled with other fish, and as a result, the sultanite rises out of the water with non-kosher fish when it is caught. The sages taught, if a fish does not currently possess scales, but will grow them after a period of time, such as the sultanit and afiat's fish, it is permitted. It is known as a fish with fins and scales, even if the scales haven't come in yet. Likewise, if it has scales now, but will shed them when it is caught and rises from the sea, such as akunas and afuna and ketasfatias and achsaftias and the otanas fish, all these are permitted. Rabbi Bahu announced in Caesarea, fish entrails and their eggs may be purchased from any person, as the presumption with regard to them is that they come only from Pelusium, or Pelusa, and from Spain, España, and non-kosher fish are not found in those areas. And this is similar to that which Abaye says. These small fish, tzachanta, of the Bab River are permitted, as non-kosher fish are not found in that river. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason that Abaye unequivocally permitted eating these fish, and he was not concerned about the potential presence of non-kosher fish among them? If we say that is due to the fact that the water flows rapidly, and these non-kosher fish, since they do not have a spinal cord, are not able to exist in a place where the water flows rapidly, as the current carries the non-kosher fish out of the Bab River, and consequently all the remaining fish are kosher, if that's what we're saying is the explanation, we have a problem, because that is not the case, since we see that non-kosher fish do exist in rivers with strong currents. So rather, perhaps Abaye permitted the fish because the water is salty, and these non-kosher fish are not able to exist in a place of salty water since they do not have scales. This too is not the case, since we see that non-kosher fish exist in salty water. So rather, Abaye permitted the small fish in the Bab River because the mud in that river is not suitable for non-kosher fish to reproduce, and the conditions in the river render it an unproductive habitat for non-kosher fish. So Ravina says nowadays, as the government built canals between the rivers, and the Goza River and the Gamda River spill into the Bav and carry non-kosher fish there, it is prohibited to eat the small fish without a thorough inspection to make sure no non-kosher fish are included among them. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara cites several other statements of the Amoraim, the sages of the Talmudic era, that concern the legal status of fish. Abaye says this creature known as the sea donkey, the Chamara de Yama, it is permitted. The creature known as the sea ox, the Torah de Yama, this is prohibited. And your mnemonics, remember this law is impure is pure and pure is impure, i.e. the name of an animal which is non-kosher on land is kosher in the sea, and the name of the animal which is kosher on land is non-kosher in the sea, for these two particular species of aquatic life. Rav Ashi said that the type of fish known as Shefar Nuna is permitted, and the type of fish known as Kadesh Nuna is prohibited. And your mnemonics, remember this law is that which is holy to the Lord and not for humans, and that some say that Rav Ashi said the type of fish known as Kavar Nuna is prohibited, and your mnemonic is the grave, kever, is impure like the graves of Gentiles, which are not marked, right? Because they don't have a law where if they walk over a grave, they're rendered impure and they have to deal with that. They don't have that law. It doesn't affect them. So the graves of Gentiles are impure in the sense that they're not necessarily marked. Obviously, today, people have cemeteries, they mark graves. But in the ancient world, that was certainly not always the case. The Gemara relates several incidents involving sages and their rulings with regard to fish. Rabbi Akiva happened to come to Ginzak, and they brought before him a certain fish that was similar to chipusha, which is a non-kosher aquatic creature. And when he enclosed it in a basket, he saw that it had scales, which it shed as it struggled to escape from the basket. So he permitted it on that basis. Rav Ashi happened to come to Tamduria, where they brought before him a certain fish that was similar to an eel. Eel is not kosher. And he took it out and held it against the light of day, and he saw that there were thin scales on it, and he permitted it. Rav Ashi also happened to come to a certain land where they brought before him a fish that was similar to Shefar Nuna. And he enclosed it in a white vessel and saw that it shed dark scales, which he could see against the white background of the container, and he permitted it. And Rabbi Bar Chana happened to come to Akra de Agma, and they brought him some tzachanta, a dish prepared from small fish, and he heard a certain man calling it bate, the name of a non-kosher sea creature. And so Rabbi Bar Chana said to himself, from the fact that he called it bate, I can conclude from here that there is a non-kosher substance in the tzachanta, and he did not eat from it that night. In the morning he examined the fish, and in fact he found non-kosher substance in it, and he read the following verse about himself: no sin shall befall the righteous. He was stringent on himself and he was saved, where somebody else might have been more easygoing and come to eat the non-kosher food. That's where we'll stop. But definitely an important theme that we saw here over and over again is, the sages were able to make these rulings. We're not. Right? So it's food, what's kosher, what's not, very, very tricky. Whenever there's a question, ask your local Orthodox rabbi. These days there's also tremendous resources online, for example, from the Orthodox Union. But reading something, on the web is not always going to tell you what's really going on in front of you. And we have to be very, very careful. This is a very important area of the law, what a Jew can and cannot eat. And as we've said many times, it has nothing to do with hygiene. And it might be really good, but we're not allowed to eat it. And so, when that situation arises, we say, wow, that looks great. That smells great. But what can I do? My Father in heaven said, I can't eat that. That's the law. That's the way it is. Okay, Joseph, with so much caution in separating kosher from non-kosher, I find it interesting that it is permissible to buy kosher food at the common market if it's packaged. Maybe it's because of the packaging. You're talking about in modern times that we can go to just a general supermarket where everyone goes, Jews and non-Jews, and we can buy kosher products, right, that are marked kosher. And that is perfectly okay, as we all know. And you're saying, well, isn't there a big concern about intermingling? Yes and no. Definitely it is hyper prohibited at every level to intermarry. Jews have to marry Jews. But, we're not so much concerned about bloodshed and idolatry and licentiousness in our society now. We're able to have friends that are non-Jews, thank God. We just have to maintain boundaries, right? And so in terms of shopping at the supermarket, the important boundary is it kosher or is it not? So Samira is talking about what the cooking of Ben Dorosai is. By Ashkenazim, it's 1/3 cooked, and by the Mizrahi, it's half cooked. So that's approximately how we understand that law today. Thank you very much. Bill, the death by vinegar story. This feels like an orphaned tale. That is, it's a story that we've retained part of it, usually the end, but where details that were common knowledge at the time of recording have been lost to us. I think that's a great observation, Bill. I'm sure you're right. Compare the narrower category of orphan punchline, whereas the punchline of a joke is remembered, but not the setup. Like the British example, as the bishop said to the actress, I'm not even familiar with that. But I'm sure I could think of an example, right, where the line is just kind of implies humor, even though we've lost the rest of the joke. I'm just not getting an example to mind right now, but I get what you're saying. An orphan punchline or an orphan story. Very good. Lucy, so a Jew could not run a general grocery store or a general liquor store because they would be making a forbidden profit from so many items. That's very interesting. I mean, obviously Jews do own stores, right? They do own non-kosher markets. Do Orthodox Jews own non-kosher markets? It's very interesting. I think that we don't have the concern today that wine of non-Jews is used for idolatry. We certainly don't drink it, right? We don't drink it. We only drink kosher wine. I don't know that a Jew is not permitted to buy and sell non-kosher wine. I just don't know. I wish I knew that off the top of my head. I don't know. But like that kind of thing, and whether a Jew could have a partner who's not Jewish. And there's all kinds of partnerships between Jews and non-Jews, but they require very special partnership agreements. A lot of it has to do with whether the business is benefiting on Shabbos or not. As we've already seen, we discussed that a few weeks ago. But in terms of benefiting from prohibited substances, for instance, can an Orthodox Jew be part of a non-kosher restaurant? I don't think so. I just don't know these laws offhand. I am not a rabbi. Have I said before? I am not a rabbi. But you're raising a really interesting question and concern. If you're going to own such a business and you're an Orthodox Jew, you would certainly be checking with your Rav what is possible and what is not. What can you carry in your store and what cannot? Again, in the modern world where there's so much less idolatry, some of these laws have been adjusted. But as we've also seen, there are many laws that even though the concern no longer applies that led to it, we still follow the law. Right? And a good example of that is kitniyot on Passover, which those laws came into being for Northern European Jews, where not only we can't eat chametz, right, any kind of wheat grain products that might have come into contact with leaven during Passover, but even products like lentils and legumes, which have nothing to do with leaven, but might have been stored in facilities where chametz was stored, might have been transported in containers that chametz was transported. There's a bunch of reasons why Northern European Jews don't eat those substances at Passover, which really don't apply in the modern world where, food is so well regulated that we know exactly what the history of that food has been. And lentils, that we buy at the supermarket have probably never in any way come into contact with leavened bread. Nevertheless, that law remains on the books. So it's not that we can, with our rational reasoning mind say, well, the world has changed, so I'm going to permit this to myself. Either the Rabbanim, right, the great sages, or the ruling rabbis, the rabbis who paskin on what Jewish law is, have made a change in the law, or they haven't. We don't do that for ourselves. We follow the halacha as it's given to us by our rabbinic leaders. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a great night.